Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Nazar Bina, and this is Omnichannel X's Omnichannel Podcast. Omnichannel X is brought to you by Urbina Consulting. Omnichannel X is our international learning portal where we host the thought leaders and case studies we think will be most helpful for content-rich organizations trying to build better relationships across all touchpoints. Now, enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is part 2 of our episode with Dana Rock, who is talking to us about 4 principles for making better designs. Our 4 principles are making it make sense, making it emotional, making it memorable or intentionally forgettable, making it personal. In the last episode, we talked about making things make sense and making them emotional, and that was very emotional for me. The two big items that I'm a really big proponent of, and lots of great research coming in from Dana. And today we're going to be tackling making it memorable and making it personal. So how do we use emotions to drive better memory? How do we use everything that we've talked about in the previous episode to inform making things memorable? And then top on many of my customers' lists is personalization. How do we actually make the individual feel that they're having an experience which is for them? So I've already introduced Dana on the first episode, so you can go check that out. She is a designer from Pickle Jar Communications. Sorry, I forgot her title there. Director of Experience Design at Pickle Jar Communications, and a very cool person overall. So without much further ado, Dana, I want to say hello to the group.
Hello.
Welcome. Okay, so Dana, today we're looking at making it memorable. We've been looking at this from a cognitive science perspective, which is a hugely enjoyable thing for me. We mentioned it on a previous episode that we had Anil Seth open our last real-time conference. Big fan of the cognitive science community and what they can teach us as designers, as content people, as content modelers, content engineers, information architects, everything that has to do with making an omnichannel experience. I think if you know a bit of cognitive science and know a little bit about this area, you empathize better and you understand this field better. So we're talking about memory first in this episode. Dana, why do you feel that there's room for improvement here, and why is it so important?
Thanks. I think make it memorable, which is also make it memorable or intentionally forgettable, but think about what is the lasting impact that you want to have for your customers. Do you want them to remember this experience? And I think sometimes brands tend to think like we want people to remember us, but what do you want them to remember? At what point in the journey? At what kind of element do you want to create? And actually, very, very infrequently are there examples of people really consciously creating and designing for, this is the bit that I really want you to remember, and this is the bit that's forgettable, and really thinking about that. So a couple of places to go with this is, what is memory? Memory is this kind of neurally encoded experience where, and again, it's kind of going to get filtered down into the emotional relevance of something. We don't necessarily, like if you've read War and Peace, I don't know why I picked that book, but I guess there's a lot in it. You may not necessarily remember everything because there's a lot going on in that book, but you might remember the kind of feeling of like, it was good, it was bad, and and maybe some key bits of the book. So like the Battle of Borodino is a very specific example, but like a really memorable part of that book. Anyway, so we remember certain things, and it often gets distilled in a certain way. And, research shows that there are patterns in what we tend to remember. So we know from Daniel Kahneman, who I mentioned in the previous podcast, that we tend to remember the peak and the end of an experience. And if it's something that really engages our senses, so, very emotional, particularly positive emotion, we tend to actually remember positive experiences better than negative one. And there's absolutely brilliant books. So if anyone's interested in the topic of memory, there's a wonderful book, which I can't recommend highly enough, by Veronica O'Keefe, which is called The Rag and Bone Shop. And it's about, this is written by somebody who's a psychiatrist, actually, and it talks about how memories make us and we make memories. And it's a really amazing book, and it's in that book that the author suggests that this kind of bias towards remembering the positives is why perhaps for some people, when they think of their childhood, it was always sunny. And when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, I thought the weather was just different in the 90s, because all of my memories of childhood where it's like Saturday morning walking to the shop to buy sweets, it was sunny, but clearly it wasn't. Like I could look up the
And
weather.
you're from the UK, you do know that.
I am from the UK as well, so no way is that true, but it's a nice example of the kind of the bias of our memories of, you know, my positive memories of childhood of going to buy sweets on a Saturday morning with my dad would be there was blue sky, and clearly there wasn't blue sky because, as you say, I grew up in the UK predominantly. So I think it's interesting when we're thinking about, you know, as designers, how do we intentionally design for the kind of experiences that we want people to have? Do we want people to have a particular kind of peak and end? And I think people who work in the kind of the business of experiences, so things like hospitality, actually probably have got this right, because I think they kind of intuitively understand that the end is really important. Like even if a customer has a bad experience en route, if you know, give them 20% off the bill, if you give them, you know, the chocolate mints at the end, if you have a kind of a fond farewell at the end of the trip, then people will think positively about it, even if overall there were actually some real troughs in that experience. Just to kind of back that up with a bit of research as well. So this is something that Daniel Kahneman describes, of a piece of research that looks at people's experiences of pain. And you're nodding, so perhaps you're familiar with this one of, you know, you've got two people who are undergoing a surgical procedure, and either they have a kind of a great amount of pain, like a 10 out of 10, and then it kind of eases off gradually, or they just have moderate pain. And it's the people, you'd think it's that moderate pain would be more preferable than excruciating pain and it easing off. But by kind of smoothing off the end of that experience, people overall are kind of more positive about that experience than those people that had the mild end. So influencing the end of how people kind of finish that, the level of pain that they are as they come out of that experience, has a greater impact than the full duration. You know, it's not a complete narrative in terms of how we're experiencing things. And so I think that's going to
It's
be
one of my
really useful.
favorite studies. I think I
Yeah.
love that study. It's such a clear, simple example that we would rather have more pain for longer, but the narrative that we take away, our memory of it is, oh yeah, it got better at the end.
Yes.
He also uses the simple the record scratch story, which is one of my favorites from that book, where he says how someone was talking to him about how they were listening to this beautiful piece of music, and then at the end there was a scratch on the record, and it ruined the whole thing.
Yes.
And that's, we all empathize with that. We can all go, oh yeah, it ruined the whole thing. That doesn't make any sense, really. You know, why would 40 minutes of wonderful music be destroyed by one bad second at the end? But that is how we retain the
Mm.
stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, people could listen to this and they go, oh, do I just need to make the end really good then? But actually, I think it's also thinking about where we create moments to enable memory to happen. The experience, the best example that I can think of is pretty amazing experience, because last year, as I think you alluded to in the intro of the last podcast, I kayaked down the Grand Canyon, which is in itself an awesome, in the true meaning of the word, an awesome experience, paddling down, you know, in my little kayak down the Grand Canyon for 2 weeks. Now, objectively, I do remember the sand was horrendous. The sand, really fine sand, trying to put contact lenses in a desert, not great. 40-degree heat, bugs, ant bites, definitely some of that stuff existed. But my overall feeling
For
of
our
that trip,
American listeners, 40-degree heat is really, really hot.
oh yes, sorry. Thank you for the translation. Yeah, and so for sure, I do recall that there were negative things, but my feeling of that trip was just like, oh wow, that was awesome. And I think one of the reasons why is because on the last day of the trip, and this is my example of how you design for memory, was on the last day of the trip, the guide said, like, we've had an amazing trip. This is a trip that you'll remember for the rest of your life. We've had 2 weeks floating down this canyon, and we're going to come out soon. We're going to come out soon. And what I want to do is just from the campsite to the top of the first rapid, let's paddle in silence. Let's just kind of float along and absorb it all and feel what it's like to be in the Grand Canyon and to experience what we've experienced. And it was just like a little cutout to say, now's your moment to be, right? Be here, feel this, remember this moment. Guess what, Noz?
You
That's the
remember?
bit I remember in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's the best bit.
that's
So,
the
okay,
best bit.
I want to put in a metaphor here. You make a good point about this does not mean you can skimp on the quality and rescue it at the end. Because if you try to put a bow on a turd, it's going to be a bow on a turd, and it can actually be worse in the sense that I've had that where you've had terrible experiences. It's been a disaster. The application doesn't work. The service isn't bad. The service is bad. The people are not helpful. And then at the end they go, ta-da! And there's kind of like this expectation that they still have an automatic kind of assumption that everything went great, and that actually makes it worse.
Mm,
So if you try to kind of like pick it all up at the end and it's been a disaster, it's the opposite of that. You're instead of having this wonderful closure and memorable piece that really makes you kind of forget some of the bad experiences. If it's been too bad, you have to acknowledge that and try to correct that in an appropriate way, or else you're really trying to, you're not getting a cherry on top.
yeah,
You're
yeah, for sure.
insulting the person.
Yes, and I think that it would be erroneous for the takeaway to be make sure the ending's good. The piece really is to understand that what we remember tends to be the peak, the trough, the particularly strong senses, the positive emotions. And now that you know that, how's that going to inform your design practice? Because I'm going to assume that people listening to this are, interested people engaging with omnichannel X. They're thinking, how do I create a good experience for my customers, right? They're not out to create a bad experience. But now that you know that, if you want them to remember and think positively about your brand and recommend it, then what are the moments that you want to have in mind that they might use to kind of trigger talking about their experience of your brand, your organization? And is there a point in the journey that people typically have in which you want to create that space to make something memorable, to make something have a particular resonance? Where is that?
Mm.
And how do you use what we know about the kind of cognitive bias of how we remember things to inform how you want to create your experience?
I can put something concrete on that as well. I really like that because it's I see smart companies uh, putting in sensible dividing points in a journey. So let's say it's onboarding. I'm getting familiar with product X, be that a service or a piece of software or a physical device, and it can do lots of things. Or the onboarding process is going to be, could be weeks, who knows, could be all day or several hours, and then along that they've kind of put breakpoints and said, okay, well now you know how to do the first
Mm,
important thing. Yay, let's move on to the second thing. As opposed to, they don't have to stop there. They could just feed things at you nonstop. But they've taken a pause to say, okay, X is complete. Now we're going to start Y. And that's your opportunity to let people uh, orient themselves. And that's also your opportunity
mm,
to kind of, like your guide there in the Grand Canyon. There,
yeah,
by doing that, you're creating that space to go, you've accomplished something. Great, let's move on. And
yeah.
just by doing that, you're chopping it up, and you're giving yourself these people to get that little endorphin hit of positivity, which helps them write better memories.
Yes, yes. And you're thinking about that as the kind of the different stages, right? You're kind of
Yeah.
having little points and thinking about that.
Or creating
Um,
stages, creating sub stages
yeah,
where you previously only saw a stage.
yeah. And just to add to that as another thing, which I don't know if the people who organized my Grand Canyon trip were like really well researched neuroscience experts, or whether they just intuitively knew how to create a brilliant experience. But another thing that they did after the floating down the river kind of memorable moment was weeks and weeks after my trip, like a good month after my trip, I got a postcard. I, in the UK, got a real postcard in the post, snail mail, from Arizona, to say, wow, do you remember your trip to the Grand Canyon, which ironically only arrived sort of 2 weeks after the postcards I'd attempted to send from Arizona, such as international mail, perhaps. But it was also like long enough. And of course, on that postcard, it kind of said, hey, do you remember your trip? So it's trying to, prompt me to kind of go back to that experience, that kind of neurally encoded experience, that particular memory of the Grand Canyon, to go, hey, do you remember that? But of course, then they use that moment to say, hey, why don't you rate us on TripAdvisor, which is also brilliant, because by that point, I've gone home and I've effused about how amazing the Grand Canyon is. I've forgotten about the horrendous ant bites that I suffered. And I'm really just focused on this like really kind of trippy or inspiring moment floating down at the end. So again, that's a moment where you are creating memory, because you're creating a moment where you say, hey, do you remember that? And I think, again, there are examples of people who are intuitively doing that, creating those moments to go, hey, do you remember this and how good it was? But really understanding perhaps like the timing of that and how you link that to the previous experience, I think is something that is worth designers kind of probing around and testing and experimenting with, because I think there's something useful there.
There's you could even take that as deep or as granular as saying, putting more headings in your content, or creating several smaller pages out of one page, where because it gives people a chance to break the flow and go, okay, I've completed this, I've read this
Mm,
whole thing, I can move on to the next one. And even if you don't say anything, simply by not having one
yes.
big massive flowing page or just paragraph after paragraph of unbroken text, you give them no chance to stop, no chance even implicitly or unconsciously to go, I've done something and now I can move on.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I
Yes.
think it applies to every part of design: information design, pagination, layout, um, everything.
Yeah, and I think the way that we now kind of understand how friction can be useful, slowing down on purpose the journey. I think people are kind of getting to understand how that can be useful, even though perhaps we might think we want it to be completely smooth and seamless. What you've just described there of how do we break it down? How do we create space, and seeing space and time as ingredients in the experiences that we're trying to orchestrate.
Well, it's made me smile there because I've been talking about 4D content, content which we consider not just the length and width of our particular information space, but the depth that
Mm.
we and how we want to expose depth and where we are in space time. I've been talking about that for the past 12 years, so I'm delighted to hear you using that language. Okay, so I am really struggling to keep this into 2 tight episodes because I'm having such a good time. So, but we have to move on to making it personal. I just want to pause there for a second because I mentioned the previous episode some research. We were talking about making it memorable and the idea and the tie-ins between emotion, our subject in the previous one, and memory, our kickoff for this one. And I mentioned some research about people who have lost their emotions and
Hmm.
become disoriented and unable to wayfind or do anything effectively. And that research was by George Lakoff. He's a American cognitive linguist and philosopher. Um, and he does some great stuff on the universal metaphors, which we also kind of talked about in the previous podcast. He talks about these kind of metaphors like rising prices or hot and cold emotions or hot and cold people, warm people, chilly people. These metaphors, which and how they those kind of metaphors that are rooted in our ergonomic beings are universal across all languages. So it gives you kind of a safe set of metaphors you can use in any culture around the world. So George Lakoff is very cool. So check him out. Um, but our last principle to tackle is personalization. Big topic. When I ask kind of clients cold, what are your number one priorities? They're talking about personalization. It's got and it's controversial in our community, in the UX and content communities. It is a controversial topic. So Donna, what's your take?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super interested in personalization. I've done quite a bit in my life, I think, because of where I started in my career, which was trying to engage people in getting them to participate in fundraising events. And lo and behold, those that were a personal approach or appeared to be a personal approach because I was so good at mail merge, had a greater impact than the more generic communications. I mean, what a surprise. But so personalization has been a bit of a theme for me. And the thing I would actually start with is to say that all content is personalized content, because This is me quoting Veronica Keane, who I mentioned, who wrote the Rag and Bone Shop book, which I highly recommend, is that personal experience is the only filter through which a person can understand the present world. So people are bringing personal experience, personal expectations, memories, biases, etc., to what they experience with the things that you create. And that goes back to what you said at the beginning of episode 1 of people have experiences, not things, right? People have experiences based on the things that we create, and we want to kind of understand that. So all experiences are personal experiences, because that's, you know, the nature of it in and of itself. So that for me is the starting point for understanding, okay, how do we use personalization? How do we use personalization to add value to our customer experience? How do we better meet our strategic goals by doing things like, you know, there's me back in the day trying to get to fundraise and finding personalization more impactful than generic communications. And then I think we kind of dig into the research to understand like what works and what doesn't work in personalization.
So I find personalization there's things that come up often. The creepy factor. People are scared of making of personalizing because they don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So what is the, you know, what's the right side? How do we keep on the right side of the creepy factor? The other thing is they're constantly pleading data poverty. Oh, I can't do any kind of personalization because we don't have this amazing integrated all singing all dancing database that lets us get a 360 view across our organization of all of our people. So I have my responses to both of those, but I'm interested in yours.
Yeah, so the two things, the creepy factor and the we can't do it, which I call the dark area of impossible for reasons I'll come on to later, I think. And so for me, to understand personalization and to, first of all, to make sense of the creepy factor is what is the basis of our interactions? What is the basis of our interactions? Dialogue. Like before we do anything else, before we kind of get, you know, personalized interactions with brands, we just have conversations with people, one-on-one, me and you talking to each other. And if I suddenly knew the name of, you know, all your family members, what school you went to, what your shoe size was, and started bringing these things up in conversation, I'm going to be freaking you out, Noz. I'm not going to do this, by the way. I haven't done the research. But if I started doing that, that would be pretty freaky because you've not told me that information. And, you know, even if I was a sort of turned myself into a human CRM and wrote down every single fact that you'd ever told me. Now, you might think of me as, you know, a really kind of, you know, conscientious friend who always remembers your birthday. But also you might go, blimey, why have you got my shoe size? And, you know,
They're a bit keen.
you know, yeah, it's a bit odd, because I think our basis of understanding in you know, interaction, full stop, and most of that interaction is human interaction. The basis of that is just dialogue with another human being. So when we start having dialogues with brands, that's where things get interesting, because that's where things can easily misfire, either because I haven't given you this information, so why are you trying to do something? So for example, if a brand starts trying to sell me products that totally I'm not going to buy, they've assumed something. So for example, they've assumed on the basis of like age or gender or something like that, and they're selling you, you know, particular products, and you're just going, blimey, this is just so not relevant to my, you know, personal life path. And then equally, the frustration of, I've told you what my address is, so why haven't you remembered my address from my last order? This is really frustrating. So I think if we are in a human interaction, you're talking to a friend, you would expect them to remember certain things. You maybe hope that they'd remember it was your birthday. You might assume that they'd remember where you live and what your name is, and they've got your phone number saved and those sorts of things. But there's a level to which we expect. And I think if we understand it as what would be acceptable if we were human, and then try and scale that to something that is a brand. And then, of course, you are turning the human into the CRM, and you're looking at your technical capabilities. But I think there's also two ways of thinking about this. So I have, obviously it's podcast, so I can't demonstrate it, but I will describe. I have a little chart that I that I show of the scale of personalization, when you've got one axis, which is about essentially the kind of the processes of what is possible, and you've got another one, and it gets more and more difficult, right? And then on the other the other axis, you have a kind of a level of knowledge and a level of personalization. So if I was to get you something like a gift, then if I knew nothing about you, if I
So
knew
wait a second. So one axis is how personal, and the other axis is
yeah, how difficult it is to deliver, like the
right,
so but I can plot in a line something
right.
that's kind of right in the bottom left hand corner, kind of 0 0, as it were, if we were to give something a score, and I had to buy you a gift and I knew nothing about you, I'd buy a vanilla flavored sponge cake. If it was Christmas, it might be like a candy cane. And if anyone's taken a kid to see it's like Santa Claus or equivalent, there's some really generic gift that's
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
just like for a boy or for a girl, and it's just
And
there are
even those
two
screw up
options.
terribly.
Yeah. And then we get right to the extreme end where, so for me, the best gift I've ever had in my life was a hand-carved canoe paddle created by my dad that had the Canadian flag, kind of maple leaf, kind of carved in one side, and a dinosaur carved on the other side, because I was born in Canada and my nickname is Dino, like Dino the dinosaur. So this is like a super personalized gift that took months to create, and also incorporates like so much that my dad knows about me, right? So it's super high in terms of process. He spent months in the garage making the paddle, but also super high in terms of like, what are the different things that I know? And I should add, he's my dad, so it's okay that he knows this stuff, like, you know what I mean? And of course, it's super memorable. It's something that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. Now, if we're an organization, we don't have, first of all, necessarily the knowledge about our customers to know, what is meaningful to them in terms of their personal identity, like their nickname, their country, et cetera, et cetera. But also we don't have the workshop space to be creating these hand-carved things. So we do need to think about our technical processes, what we've got available, and we need to be thinking about what's the customer data that we have, what's the customer data as well, crucially, that's going to add value, because there's lots of information that my dad has about me, like what grades I got at school, the fact that I came third in the beanbag race, aged 8. Not relevant information, like not fundamental to me and a sense of my identity, not relevant to this particular gift. So selecting the information that adds value. Needless to say, the paddle was the perfect size for me, right, as well. And selecting that information, and then also having a scalable a scalable process that you can deliver en masse. So for me, the dark area of the impossible is the stuff that you can't do, either because you lack insights about your customers, so that's blocking off the top of the chart, or you don't have processes that allow you to scale effectively, where the kind of the value that you're adding through personalization is worth the effort that you're going to. Because theoretically, you could, hire a bunch of interns to all write handwritten letters or emails to people, but the ROI on that is disastrous, right? Like, that's not going to work. We're only doing those one-to-one interactions on things like, I worked in fundraising, as I mentioned, so like really high value donors. You've got to be giving me thousands and thousands of pounds before I start writing you personal messages. Otherwise, I'm just getting snazzy with mail merge. So it's understanding where are you as an organization, and if you want to decrease the impossible, the dark area of impossible, you either want to have more insights, which might mean more data, but also it might be more insight about what are the things that we know about our customers that actually add value. Come on to that in a moment. And the other bit is make your processes better, make it possible to deliver at scale something. So you're not doing kind of handwritten stuff. I'm sure nobody listening to this is doing that, but you know what I mean? Like, rather than it being a kind of complex workaround.
Yeah, well, what they are doing is they're using blocky, unstructured content. They're using word processing tools like Word.
Yes.
They're keeping live data in visual design tools like InDesign. They're just chucking the data over the wall to the design house, and then when there's an update, they have to update the Word document, then email a new copy of the Word document to the team who's got InDesign. They put it in the PDF copy. So that, yeah, there's inefficient processes all over the place.
Yes.
I love your graph, by the way. I'm still in that. Just be warned, that's getting nicked. That's awesome. And the dark area is impossible. So, but and I have to say, I'm going to sidetrack us for a second to say I'm also born in Canada and was a dinosaur nut when I was little. So
Oh,
so I love that story just too much in terms of talking about personal. So you've been very, very research backed in a lot of this, and so far in both episodes. I'm interested to know if you have any research to share with us on personalization.
yeah. Well, the bit about like the thing that I just mentioned about in terms of insights and what actually adds value to your customers. And there's,
Mhm.
I mean, this isn't neuroscience. This is Gartner research. Okay, so we're kind of a bit more in a
Next best thing.
regular wheelhouse. But a piece of research about what personalization adds the most value to customers, and the answer is stuff that makes things easier. Right. So nothing too complex here. This is the thing where it's an e-commerce experience, and you remember my address details, my delivery details, you remember my bank card, and so it's easier for me to pay, or whatever it is. And that is more useful than things like motivational stuff of you're trying to understand why I'm particularly motivated to interact with your brand, and then trying to use that to give more personalized content. Now that stuff appears to be less effective, and I think what the Gartner research doesn't quite go into, but I kind of ponder, is why is that? Why is that? And I think there's possibly two things. One of which is that stuff that we making stuff easier is easier, I think, perhaps to research, because we can perhaps see it in our digital analytics, we can see it in our heat maps if users are getting stuck, and we can understand how it can smooth out that process. So we can have a bit more insight into that. And so we're just better at it, like we're good at it, and actually we experience examples where a smoother process is adding value to the experience. Whereas in things like motivational, we're kind of poking around with quite a lot of assumptions. And why do I want to buy this particular drink product? Is it because I want to lose weight? Well, you're assuming that it's because I want to lose weight, but do I? Is it for something totally different? Am I buying it for someone else? No, and therefore
There's
your
a
content's
great
less likely to
example.
hit the mark.
There's a great
Yeah.
example from. Sorry, she is the author of Content Everywhere. Sarah Watcher Butcher.
Yes.
Our Content Everywhere strategy and structure for future ready content. She gave an example of a menstrual calendar application.
Yes. Yes. I know.
Yes, you know this one,
I
and
know
so
this
it
one.
starts pinging you about all this like baby readiness stuff and fertility, and she's going, I didn't say that I was trying to have a baby, or like no, it's because they just kind of went there completely unprompted, and the idea is that they're getting giving you a more personal experience, and going and getting better at knowing you,
Mm.
when they've gone in with utterly the wrong assumptions, and that's an instant delete. So
Yes.
there's using these things judiciously and thinking, when is this an appropriate statistical generalization that is going to
Mm.
allow me to scale my process, and when is this an assumption that's I don't know if I have a quick or a quick pithy way to sum up how to tell the difference between those two, but I think that doing your research carefully is the no-brainer there. And I don't know, it never ceases to amaze me the kind of face palm mistakes that even the largest organizations can make. Any kind of disaster avoidance advice there is welcome.
Yeah, disaster avoidance advice. I think it's, to me, it goes back to thinking about these as dialogues, like the human interactions that we have with people. And so
Mm.
those clangers is that if you actually, like in the example that you've just shared with the menstrual app, if that was somebody that you knew, you would more likely have said, and why are you doing this? Or actually they were talking about what they were doing because of the why, and the app was kind of incidental to that. And sometimes we need to have that context, but also if you got it wrong, you could quickly sort out that conversation quite quickly. So um, it, in things where we assume, so let's say somebody gets their exam results, right? And they get A's, and you go, wow, congratulations, that's amazing. They might go, yeah, I'm over the moon. But they might also go, I'm really gutted. I should have got, in this country, we have A stars, which are even higher than A's.
A
And I
plus,
didn't
yeah.
get, and I didn't get those grades. So I'm not going to the university of my choice. I'm really gutted. And if you were their teacher or their classmate, you would understand the context of whether that's an A or an A star. Now, if you were like the next door neighbor, maybe you don't know in quite as much detail. You hear that they got A's, you say congratulations, and they go, no, actually, I'm really gutted. And they go, oh, I'm really sorry for you. And they straight away change their response because they've got a little bit more information, they've got a little bit more context. And the problem with brands is that sometimes we're going to get it wrong, perhaps. But how do we then correct ourselves?
Yeah.
And I think there are some good examples. So, in the UK, we have Mother's Day in March, and some card companies obviously looking to sell cards, but you send out the email saying, hey, do you want to opt out of all that Mother's Day stuff? Because for some people that's a very emotional topic, but it's very, unfortunately, it's sad, it's about grief, it's about sadness, it's about loss, it's about a whole bunch of things. It's not about celebrating your gratitude for your mother. And so let's just give people the opportunity to opt out. Let's not assume the emotion based on the occasion. And it provides that kind of opt-out email provides an opportunity for dialogue, right? An opportunity for them to go, no, actually, this isn't me. This isn't a moment of celebration. This
And I
is
think
sadness.
you're touching on something which I think comes up a lot, and I find that a lot of my customers are trying to use algorithms and data scientists and etc. to be way too clever. Just to kind of, the assumption is that we should automate and detect our way around these things. And there's so many times where we go, why not just ask? Pop a question, send an email, send a little text message, whatever. Ask. There's nothing wrong. Google does it all the time.
Yeah.
Google
Yeah.
is king of the data analytics, triangulation, sniffing up all of our patterns, etc. They pop up questions all the time. Was this result relevant? Did we get you there on time? Is this the kind of recommendation you want in your feed? Are you enjoying this? Whatever. Like they constantly just ask. They even ask things which are obviously outsourcing training of their algorithms. They put up like two different words and go, are these synonyms? Is this image similar to that image? They just kind of pop up these things where they're obviously farming out their AI education to me, but they're utterly unafraid to just ask. And I don't know why. I think there's a certain anxiety around entering into dialogue, treating the person not as a data point in our analytics, but remembering that they're a human. You can ask them questions, they can give you replies.
Yes. And, was this helpful? Give us some feedback is really important. I think that when we think about personalization, we're often thinking about how we personalize, automate, and scale up sending stuff out. But what we really need to do, because we understand that personalization is about dialogue, is we need to understand how we can scale dialogue, engagement with our customers, not just talking at.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. So this has been a fantastic dialogue. One of my favorites. I've really enjoyed this. Dana, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I hope we can have you back one day.
I think episode 3 is Canada and dinosaurs, right?
I think so. And you're going to teach me how to operate a kayak, because that's an anecdote you want to hear. I went with my partner to do kayaking, and for those of you who don't know, your first trip out, you kind of go around in circles in the little pond right in front of the school. Yeah, we never left that pond.
You're still there now. In fact, that's where you're recording from.
Exactly. That's why you can only see me from the waist up if you're watching this. Yeah, so I am pathetic in a kayak, but so I am. Yeah, I'm so pleased, aligned on many things. Very glad. Thank you for all of your research-backed and personal insights into all this. Incredibly useful for our audience, and we hope to see you all next time. And where can people get in touch? Dana, are you a LinkedIn person, Twitter person?
I'm a Twitter person. I'm a LinkedIn person. I'm Dana Rock, and I work for Pickle Jar Communications. So type in Dana Rock. There aren't too many of us. I think I'm doing quite good with SEO for my name. Then yeah, and you can find me online.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and see you all next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening. This has been the Omnichannel Podcast with your host, Naz Urbina, founder of Urbina Consulting. Let us know on LinkedIn or Twitter what you liked from this episode, what you think we missed, and who you would like us to interview next. Now that you've heard what we're passionate about, you can also check out urbinaconsulting.com to find out a little bit about what we do. Thank you so much, and see you next time.